Everyone for coming. So my name is Maria. I'm a D.Phil candidate in Anthropology at Oxford, and today I'm going to be talking about Colonial Administrative Services course at Oxford, but generally the colonial training at Oxford post-World War I. So if we go to the next slide.
Oh, it doesn't like me. Oh, what a racist computer. There we go. Okay.
Yay, okay. So this is just to put a face to the name. This is Margery Perham. She's known as the godmother of the Colonial Service, and she actually herself was a student at Oxford. So she studied at St. Hugh's, and after her education, she took a trip to British Somaliland to visit her brother-in-law, and that really sparked her interest in colonial Africa. And later in life, she became the leading academic expert on the topic. So I've listed a few of her accolades there, but some key things I want to focus on is that she was the first fellow period at Nuffield and also the first woman fellow. She founded the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, which was at Nuffield. And she was also the chairman of the Oxford Colonial Records Project, which is a colonial archive housed here. So the first thing I wanted to show you was her actual catalog, just to show you the sheer size of it. So at one point, she was the largest amount of personal papers held at the Bodleian. So it's at 771 boxes. So I just brought this here so you could sort of see the sheer amount and how well Patricia Pugh cataloged it. And then also I wanted to talk about her close connection with Lord Lugard. So he was a colonial administrator in northern Nigeria, and he's sort of responsible and associated with indirect rule in Africa. So she's responsible for his official biography. So the next thing I have here are two little booklets. So what her role was on the course is she taught Native administration and just British colonial history, but she also had a really invested role in this course. So she not only taught, but she helped sculpt the course, was in meetings, drafting curriculum, and she really took a vested interest in the students who participated. So these two booklets are her interviews with students at the beginning of the school year, sort of understanding what their educational experiences, what their interests are, and she sort of is helping them figure out what courses would be best for them to take. So she really had a personal vested interest in these students. So the story of this course is a bit confusing because it changed names and sort of functions throughout time. But the story starts with, if we go to the next slide, someone named Ralph First. His archives are also held here at the Bodleian, and he's known as the father of the modern colonial service. He was responsible for moving the training from London at the Imperial Institute, which is pictured there, to Oxford and Cambridge. And part of this was to sort of have the cream of the crop, because simultaneously at Oxford, the Indian Civil Service had their own training. So that's in the building across the street with Indian Institute etched at the top. So that's where those candidates studied, and they were sort of known as the smarter and better candidates, and sort of the rejects went to this course. So I think he kind of wanted to have a better selection of students, but also something I argue in my thesis is that I think he also moved it here to sort of have access to like the prestigious and unrealistic role that is Oxford. He would dine at high table with candidates. He would go to the rowing matches. He really looked at athletes. So this newspaper clipping here is an interview with him, sort of asking what he's looking for in candidates and his sort of thoughts on the course. So if we go to the next slide, this was the core and original curriculum of the TAS course. So as you can see, there's a lot of subjects, and they only took this course for a year. So something that I think is really interesting is how so many different departments at Oxford took a role in this colonial training and had a role in the British colonial mission, but a lot of them don't know about it. So if we go to the next slide, the course also had something called the Colonial Services Club. This is a class photo album of all the classes minus the World War II years, but this was sort of an MCR for the students. They did matriculate, they did have a college, and you can see which college they were assigned in the album, but a lot of them were older, they were married with kids, so it was harder for them to socialize and integrate at Oxford, so this was a place for them to network. They listened to lectures, they got to know each other, some of them are housed there. So if you guys have been or seen the building called The Store on Broad Street, next to it there's something called Boswell & Co. And above it was the original Colonial Services Club. So I've highlighted it there on Broad Street. So then in 1948 it moved to South Parks Road, closer to the Rhodes House, which is where all these class photos are taken. But like I said, a lot of important speakers came. So these are the minutes of the Secretary of State's speech at the Colonial Services Club in 1948. And also every year in the club and the course, there was a supervisor who sort of took a pastoral role over students. And one of them was named E.G. Rowe. And this was honestly a gold mine when I found it. So basically he writes a history from beginning to end about the Colonial Services course that I look at, and he just writes in such great detail, and it's really helpful and a really interesting window into his thoughts on it. So if we go to the next slide. This timeline is sort of just to help us situate ourselves because it is a very confusing story of this course. So in 1934, it was renamed the Colonial Administrative Services course. Now the training included people going to East Asia. So in this booklet here, you can see the curriculum and how they selected candidates for the CAS course. Then after World War II, everything changed. They had to rejig the whole thing. And they had a lot of meetings in something called the Devonshire Committee, and those meeting minutes are here. And these people, it included people from the Colonial Office, the university, people from colonial governments, all brainstorming how can we re-strategize training post-World War II. We have less candidates, we have less of the good candidates we want after the war. So now the candidacy opened up to a lot more people than before. The age restrictions fell, they now accepted women, they now accepted people from the colonies. So these newspaper clippings show all the newspaper ads for vacancies, sort of begging people to join, and also detailing like all the changes that have happened after the war. So after that, this book is just sort of a curriculum of this course after World War II. It's called Devonshire A and B. So the A course was sort of a general training, and then B was a refresher course. So officers who had already been in the Empire could come back to Oxford and specialize in one or two subjects and just spend a year here focusing on that. So the next course was called the Overseas Services course. This course was mainly for civil servants from overseas, and it also could have had an A and B format, so I've left that booklet here. And then later it became the Overseas Services course in Government and Development. So that one was mainly for students who were non-British from newly independent countries in the Commonwealth. And then all the meanwhile this is happening, there's also something called the Foreign Services course. So, I know, so many courses. So this one was to train diplomats from international countries, not just the Commonwealth. This is all very confusing, but I think the important thing to note is that this was constantly changing, constantly ebbing and flowing as the empire was falling apart. And Oxford had a really important role in that. So if we go to the next slide, you might be asking, when did the course end? But it actually never ended. This direct successor is the Development Studies course today at Oxford. And if we go to the next slide, we can see, this is just taken from their website like yesterday, and we can see that the way they structure curriculum and the kinds of courses they teach are actually not too dissimilar from the original TAS course I showed you guys. So one of the things I look at as an anthropologist is not just the content in the archives, but also what colonial legacies exist from this course today at Oxford, and also the construction of the archive itself. So I've found it really interesting and astounding how no one really remembers this course when I talk about it, and I just want to understand why it is lost in institutional memory. So if we go to the next slide, something interesting that has come about this research is that I talked to people and they were like, oh, I think my dad was on this course, I'm not sure, and then I found their records in the Perham Papers or somewhere else, or at Q. So I just left my email there if anyone wants to chat more, knows more. But yeah, thanks so much.